and welcome to an engaging discussion on the theme for the month, Trends in Nutrition, and the topic, what should we be eating? I am Sarah Ramaya, Curriculum Design Strategist and Webinar Coordinator at ASRM. Our speakers for today's session are Dr. Angela Thayer and Ms. Judy Simon. Dr. Thayer is board certified in reproductive endocrinology and infertility, obstetrics and gynecology, and lifestyle medicine, and is one of the founding partners of Seattle Reproductive Medicine. Ms. Simon practices as a registered dietitian nutritionist and adjunct faculty at the University of Washington. Before we begin, please note, this webinar was developed by the American Society for Reproductive Medicine as an educational resource and service to its members and other reproductive professionals. While this webinar reflects the views of the panelists, it is not intended to be the only approved standard of practice or to dictate an exclusive course of treatment. Members should always use their best judgment in determining a course of action and be guided by the needs of the individual patient, available resources, and institutional or clinical practice limitations. Please note, all attendees will be muted except the panelists. This is an interactive discussion, so please type a question in the Q&A window at any time. We will read as many selected questions as possible. A recording of this webinar will be archived on the ASRM website in the coming weeks. Please watch your email for notification. I will now turn this presentation over to Angela and Judy.
Thank you, Sarah. Just to state, we both have nothing to disclose. And so for the objectives for today, we really wanted to have this presentation be for you about current trends in nutrition and what maybe you want to think about when you're eating yourself and when you're counseling patients. So there's so much marketing that goes on regarding current diets available, like Whole30, intermittent fasting, Keto, Mediterranean, Noom, clean eating, flexitarian. We want to make sure everybody understands what those are and what the pros and cons are of each strategy. And then we want to talk about other things with nutrient trends like the microbiome, certain deficiencies that are common, and ultra-processed foods. And finally, we want to end with how to eat sustainably for yourself and for the planet. And Judy and I have designed this to be somewhat of a back and forth. So we're going to have some conversation between the two of us. Since we frequently lead classes and talk about these diets and food all the time, as it's something we're both passionate about. So why is the diet industry not solving our problems? We know that there's a major problem in the United States that's getting worse every year, and that's 2/3 of Americans are overweight or obese. And 60% of adults and children get most of their calories from ultra-processed food. This came from a British Medical Journal article where they did a retrospective study of over 9,000 patients and asked them where they were getting their calories. Many also get their calories from added sugars. And also people have a more sedentary lifestyle now. Many people work in front of a screen and then spend leisure time in front of a screen. So these things in combination have led to a lot of weight gain. And then billions of dollars are spent on marketing these diets and in the diet industry with questionable results. The trend does not seem to be reversing.
And we were just saying last night, it's amazing. Anytime you go to Google or look something up or you're being data mined on social media, you are bombarded by the diet industry and a diet culture.
Yep, exactly. Now, this article came out at the end of December in the New England Journal, and it really looked at kind of a prognostic prediction of the trends. And if it continues, the prediction is that by 2030, which is really just around the corner, 1 in 2 adults will have obesity, and that the largest group of obesity is going to be considered severe obesity, which is a BMI over 35 for women, non-Hispanic Black adults, and low-income adults. So you can see here, you know, the darker the picture gets, the more severe the obesity. This just shows the common trends and the color change as the time has gone on, that it just keeps getting, we just keep having more and more weight gain. both for overall obesity and severe obesity. And in this graphic, you can see the dark color here is severe obesity, and that this is the most prominent type for all these subgroups. And they've even lumped together underweight or normal weight. And this is smallest for almost all categories at this point.
And Angela, and wouldn't you think that with people spending more money on diets and trying diets, that actually they may not be getting the results that they set out to get for those who are seeking weight loss?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So what influences the way people eat? We know there's, lots of things here: culture and religion, health issues, availability and convenience and cost are huge. Taste, what tastes good to you. And so all those things, and to lose weight, finally, all these things can influence how people eat, why they choose to eat the way they do. But we know that really the ultra processed foods that have kind of come into our space and into our world are dominating, convenience stores and grocery stores, and so much of snack food and these products are addictive, right? The combination of salt, fat, and sugar has really done a disservice. So, and this study came out just last year in 2021, which looked at ages 2 to 19, and the number of calories consumed by this age group is continuing to increase, went up to 67% in a decade. So just really remarkable how many calories people are getting from these kind of foods or non-foods that have all gone through an industrialized process by doing multiple manipulations to enhance flavors and sweeteners and crunch and hyperpalatability and mouthfeel. So all of these things, not to mention the fact that they're convenient, they've got a great shelf life, and they've got a high profit margin. And, people like them. So when you get used to eating these foods, it's really harder to eat the whole foods.
And Angela,
yeah,
how would you describe, so these are definitely ultra processed foods. They look little like the original food that they came from. But we do have to share that there are foods that are processed, that are minimally processed, that really are convenient for people. So there are some healthier lines of frozen meals that look pretty similar to if you made that bowl at home. So we're really talking about these, super high sugar, salt, fatty foods that really are not very nutrient dense, but they are calorically dense. And they kind of bump out the good nutrition that we're trying to promote that people need.
correct. So processed foods, not ultra processed, would be an example, would be like, pasta or, tomatoes in a box. So those have been processed, or tomato sauce, it's been processed, but minimally so. So not a whole bunch of ingredients you don't recognize on the label. All right, Judy, this is going to be yours.
Yes. So what are we eating? We know that 40% of Americans are not meeting their nutrition needs with the current diets, with what they're eating. And that 60%, 6 in 10 adults, are living with chronic disease. And the Healthy Eating Index, which is an indicator of how compliant or how well are we doing meeting the dietary guidelines, has not improved for adults over the past 15 years. So we've been measuring what people are eating, and we're not seeing an improvement. And that brings our first poll question to all of you. Okay, so we are happy to see that 3/4 of you are familiar or you've heard of it, but some of you have never heard of it. And we're assuming that we have a lot of healthcare providers out there. So let's go ahead and go on to the next slide so I can give you a little bit of background. So every 5 years, the USDA and the Health and Human Services collaborates with a federal advisory committee. These are experts in nutrition and health, professors, PhDs, doctors, dietitians. And what they do is based on current science, what we know about nutrition and health, they develop dietary guidelines. And this index gives us an idea of how closely we're meeting the guidelines. And you can see that for most adults, we're really missing the mark, or we're only halfway there. And Angela and I are even more concerned because with COVID, this data was pre-COVID. They do NHANES data every 5 years where people are surveyed, blood tested, look at their medical histories, that we're guessing that with some of the health impact of COVID, these numbers might even go down, which is concerning. Let's go to the next slide. So when we look at what are people actually eating based on this NHANES data compared to the recommendations, we're really falling short. This is Americans age 1 year and older. And this chart shows us that on average, 80% or more of us are below the recommendations on the basic foods, vegetables, fruit, and dairy. Now, for grains, most of the population meets or exceeds the refined grain recommendations. So they're recommending that half our grain should be whole grain, and they're falling below recommendations for whole grains. And over 50% of the population meets or exceeds recommendations for total protein foods, but not for the subgroup of seafood, nuts, seeds, and soy products. So these are really basic foods. These aren't complicated diets. And you can see that we're definitely missing the mark. Let's go to the next slide. And you can see there's some key nutrients that we're missing: vitamin D, choline, omega-3, and then some of your micro minerals and vitamins. Thank you.
So, yeah, everybody kind of knows they should eat more vegetables and fruit. Why don't they do it? It's kind of interesting, and more legumes, and people are very focused on getting enough protein, but that's not where they're falling short so much. So we're going to talk about some of these diet trends: keto, paleo, Whole30, clean diet, Mediterranean, anti-inflammatory diet, and fasting. And so before we do that,
yes.
we actually have a couple more poll questions for all of you. So Sarah, if you can put the first one up for about 10 seconds. All right. So, some people haven't tried any, but 2 being the most common. So yeah, so we're going to go through some of these. So we're going to start with keto.
Okay, looks like I'm up. So, wow, when you talk about keto, that's short for ketogenic diet, these are diets that generally most people go on some type of a keto diet, basically because they want to lose weight. They want to kick into that fat burning. A very true medically based ketogenic diet eliminates all simple sugars, refined carbohydrates, pulses, whole grains, fruits, or starchy vegetables. It's incredibly low in carbohydrate and up to about 95% fat, putting the person's body into a state of ketosis. So they burn fat instead of glucose for fuel. Most folks go on some more of a modified, they might call it dirty ketone or modified Atkins. And so, yes, you can lose weight. You can lose weight really quickly. And if they're doing true keto, you're using ketones for fuel rather than glucose. It's difficult to sustain for the long term, and there's frequent weight gain after about 1 to 2 years. So what could be positive about this diet? On a medical basis, it could be helpful potentially with medical supervision for epilepsy and other neuro conditions. But on the negative side, it can be very difficult to follow, really low in fiber, antioxidants, and many micronutrients that we need for our body. And so this particular picture here shows nothing green, so no vegetables. What do you think, Angela? Have you had people or had any experience with these really low carb type of diets that can be quite popular or concern as a physician?
People do, and somehow there's some information out there that this is a good diet for fertility, which it really is absolutely not a good diet for people who are trying to conceive. And we really try to discourage this type of eating if somebody's trying to get pregnant, because they're missing out on so many nutrients. The other thing too that I've read studies on is that, people use it for this rapid weight loss because you lose water weight, you burn through your glycogen stores. But at the end of the day, when they've done more studies, you're actually losing more lean muscle mass than actual fat mass. And so then when people have a rebound, when they find this so restrictive and they gain weight, they actually gain more fat mass at the end. So overall, You know, for short-term weight loss, maybe, but other than that, I don't see much benefit in this, and it just doesn't work for most people on a long-term basis.
In the people who are following it very strictly, it's very hard to be physically active. It's hard to go out and take a run, do a spin class, go jogging on a very low carbohydrate type of diet. And the long-term studies have shown when you compare it to more of a traditional higher fiber, more moderate carbohydrate diet, that people can lose weight on either one, and they kind of tend to meet in the middle, where people slowly maybe add back some carb, which is actually maybe not a bad thing. So I would say this is one of the most popular ones. If you're on social media and you're on TikTok, I think every other reel is somebody doing a cooking demo of something that's keto and they want to be a coach. So there's a lot of popular coaching going out there on that. Thanks. We'll let you talk about the next one.
All right. So paleo, is a step up from keto in that it adds back. So there's still a lot of meat and fish and protein, focusing on that, but then it adds back fruits and vegetables and nuts and seeds, which is good. It still eliminates a lot of major food groups. So it's eliminating legumes and greens, which we know have a lot of nutrients. It's also eliminating refined sugar and dairy. And so the idea is this diet might be something that people ate in the Paleolithic area, or the caveman diet, the hunter-gatherer diet, when they didn't have industrialized grain and industrialized farming. But in reality, back in the day, the hunting it wasn't so easy to go buy these meats. Hunting is actually much harder than gathering. And so the true caveman diets most of them tend to be more plant-based than animal-based, with an occasional feast. But in the sense of being very expensive, people tend to eat, more organic, higher end produce. So if you look in somebody's grocery cart, right, it can be pretty expensive if you're eating this way. What do you think, Judy?
Yeah, I think it's not something that's accessible to the average person or someone who's maybe on food stamps or budget constraints. And it also kind of puts a health halo on, making you feel like if you had a craving to eat bread or legumes or have some chili, that's actually a bad thing when it isn't. And I kind of question the whole paleo theme with the caveman, because I don't think their longevity was quite where we're at today. So again, kind of trendy, it's still around, but I think it kind of has a little bit of a health halo on it.
True. All right.
Okay, who's next? Oh, the anti-inflammatory. So the AIP. And it's funny, I was a little bit more familiar with this one than Angela. As being a dietitian, I'm maybe counseling 30 patients or more a week. And the rationale behind this protocol that just different people have made up, it's nothing that has been scientifically studied, is that the rationale is to avoid all foods, additives, or any type of medication that could trigger some type of inflammation in the gut, cause a dysbiosis, or a symptomatic food intolerance. And so the villains are gluten, dairy, nightshade vegetables, legumes, sugar, alcohol, caffeine, etc., depending on the protocol. So I did a deep dive just the other day on PubMed to see, do we have any research? Very limited, not very good studies. There was one on inflammatory bowel disease, small study that did find that people with inflammatory bowel disease had less symptoms, when they ate this way. So maybe there's some more to look into, but it is really restrictive. And there are some very nutrient-dense foods on that right side. Where we live in the Pacific Northwest, there's been a very popular elimination diet. And guess what? One of my patients today told me she'd been on it a couple of times. And this Abascal Way was a scientist who came up with an elimination protocol that she developed. It's never been tested. She's not a healthcare provider, does seminars, has books. Was very popular the last few years in Seattle, pretty much saying, try this elimination trial rotate these foods in and out. And I did see some senior citizens and elderly folks who lost too much weight on this and really ended up being malnourished. So it's kind of a one size fits all elimination, has no idea what your health status is. So I'm a little bit concerned about, people using this on a long-term basis, maybe working with their healthcare provider to see if it might be something appropriate for them. Okay, clean eating. What does that even mean? Well, hopefully none of us are eating dirty, but this clean eating term has come up. It doesn't belong to any person or medical society. There's no clear definition. For some people, they think of it meaning, oh, I'm eating clean. I'm going to cut out gluten and dairy because maybe those are inflammatory or they're bad for me. It's minimally processed. It promotes health and wellness. Well, those things sound good. More of a lifestyle than just a diet. But our concerns are, this is really an unregulated term. You might see it on some food products. This really could be associated with orthorexia, which is sort of a form of an eating disorder, where you take an extreme style of eating, and it's really been associated with increased risk of disordered eating patterns. So for somebody who is vulnerable or already has a preoccupation of food, this just sort of gives them another reason to restrict. So again, this is kind of this loosey-goosey trend. Angela, have you heard much about it from maybe your patients or your friends?
Yeah, I mean, I have had some people say they eat clean. And yeah, it's like, well, what does that mean? I try to have them define it. And then it seems like they put a lot of food rules or, rules around the food they eat. And sometimes I think it's okay, but I feel like other times it can just get to, again, restrictive, or somebody could tip into an eating disorder.
Okay. Thanks.
Right, Whole30.
Okay, that's been a really popular one over the last few years. It's really popular in January, where people go, hey, I'm going to go back on Whole30. That's my January reset. I think we have, what is it, the alcohol-free January for people, and then we have the Whole30. They all of a sudden, they have a really good time over the holidays, and then they want a lot of rules when it comes to January. So this is an elimination diet with some of the same ideas of the AIP, or even Paleo, where they eliminate some foods. It was developed by a physical therapist and his now ex-spouse, who's not a healthcare provider. And they said they felt themselves better when they ate all foods that were not processed, that were, cooked from scratch. So they consider it not a weight loss diet, but elimination diet for a reset for health. So you can see the no's are cut out sugar, sweets, alcohol, grains, legumes, peanuts, dairy, and then certain additives. So when you look at it, for some people, the positive could be, for some people, hey, it's a month, and they end up cooking. So I've seen some positive. Some people say, hey, I'm actually cooking, but they're doing this for their family, and they're cutting out bread for their kids, which really concerns me, because children do need a lot of carbohydrates and need a lot of energy food. So I don't know. I don't consider this a family meal planning. And I think some of the cons are restricted food choices. It's not evidence-based. And for a lot of people, it does promote weight cycling, because they're like, it's kind of like Lent. As soon as I'm over, I'm going to go have my binge. So you can see how that can add a restrictive note. And I'm hoping as we go through these diets, if you have any questions, put them in the Q&A, and we're really excited to talk about them, or maybe experiences you've had or your patients have had. Okay, Angela.
All right. So the next one is intermittent fasting. And this has also gotten more popular. It's also known as time restricted eating, where you restrict the time you're eating to a certain window, usually 8 hours, but it could be 10 hours. Or some people do the 5-2, where they eat normally for 5 days a week and have a modified fast for 2 meals a week. And the thing is, there's no exact rules on this. There's no off-limit foods. I think if the idea is you wanted it to be calorie reduction, you would eat well and skip dinner and maybe eat like a king at breakfast, a prince at lunch, and a pauper or skip dinner. Might improve insulin sensitivity since we don't process food as well in the evening as in the morning. So you do want the bulk of your calories in the morning. But people interpret this however they want. So you might skip breakfast and you might cram a whole bunch of unhealthy calories into your day. And that doesn't necessarily do much for you. So there are some studies going on. I think when it's suggested to be healthy meals, it might be good, but there's no true definition of what food should be included. So, and I think we don't, necessarily want people trying to get pregnant to be getting into ketosis ever with really prolonged fasting. So for adults in general, I think it's okay, but, jury's still out on the health benefits, I'd say.
Yeah. And there was one study that came out last year that they found that the effects of weight loss were directly related to caloric restriction, and that not really seeing, that much of a difference. A little bit of data has shown possibly some benefits with insulin sensitivity. And I always like to say we all fast every night, in a 10, 12-hour fast, after you've had adequate nourishment is probably good for all of us. But I think this gets so complicated for people. And are they going to get all their fruits and vegetables when they have that little window? What are they going to really want to eat? And I haven't seen the study showing what are they actually eating. Do you know what I mean? And that's what I'm sort of curious about too.
All right, Noom. So this comes on strong, right? So there's a ton of marketing for Noom. And this is, as much as they say it's behavioral change strategy, it's really geared for people who are trying to lose weight. And they use a concept called caloric density, where foods in this green zone are less calorically dense. So you can eat more weight, more bites of these foods without as many calories. And as you move to the yellow, that's something to be aware of. And then the red are very highly calorically dense. And so those are the ones they say keep to a real minimum. But the interesting thing on this is the success rates they publish for people who lose weight are based on pretty small numbers, because like any restrictive dieting plan, the retention is poor. So we know it's really hard for people to stick on a restricted diet with reduced calories. And it seems like most of the people we've talked to, it seems like all women, regardless of whether they said they wanted to lose weight fast or slow or any kind of style of eating and their height and their weight, seems like most women are given a 1,200 kilocalorie diet, which is just not that much for most people. And the other thing is they don't really screen people for eating disorders. And so this is a rule-based restrictive type of eating suggestion with these behavioral change coaching sessions. And although some people can be successful, many people are not, and they do charge you for this on an ongoing monthly subscription basis.
Yeah, some of my colleagues call it millennial Weight Watchers for the millennial, that somebody needs to coach you and tell you what to eat. I feel as a dietitian, it guarantees that your body will probably be in a starvation state. And that whole red light, green light, like, wow, olive oil is actually a healthy food, when not eaten in excess. So I have a little bit of a problem with the red light, green light system. They're having just egg whites where we know that egg yolks are a great source of choline. So, why not, allow all whole foods, and, having them over on the right side with ultra processed, to me is a little troublesome. Okay. So there are consequences of dieting. As you've heard us say over the last few slides, some diets can put you in a severe calorie restriction, especially if you're an active person or a larger person, can harm your metabolism, may not be enough fiber for your gut, can have some definite negative health outcomes, issues with body image. And, dieting has a really, really low success rate. So I think that it's really important to think about if there was something positive about this eating style, how could you modify it to meet your needs? Angela?
So, the other area we think about too from a healthy standpoint and not dieting and just eating a lot of great vegetables is the gut microbiome. So we know that microbiota in our gut is based on diversity, and you want a very diverse population of bacteria and an intact epithelial border, because the gut is actually one of our largest immune organs. And so really, to protect us, we want this functioning really, really well. And we know that diets that are heavy in plants and fiber are going to really increase that diversity of your gut microbiota compared to animal based or low fiber diets. The other things, exposure to antibiotics and stress can also cause a dysbiosis or damage your gut and then cause problems with your immune system. So we definitely don't want that. We want to pay attention to that and have a healthy microbiome.
Absolutely. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Angela?
This one is yours. Nutrition is not one size fits all.
Oh, there we go. Yes. Yes. Sorry about that. I was looking up. Yeah. So it is important, as we brought out, it's important that the eating style, the eating pattern meets your specific needs, your family needs, keeps you satisfied. If you're eating food that you don't really like, it's not going to last very long. And if you're having extreme cravings, it may be that you're not eating enough carbs, you're not eating enough times in the day, you're not eating early enough in the day, or there's just too many unnecessary restrictions. Your eating style has to fit into your schedule, meet your preferences, and it has to be flexible for those days that you have long days or you're in the office. So definitely need that type of flexibility. So let's see. The U.S. News and World Report every year, believe it or not, everybody gets rated. They rate it the best overall diet. So this is 2021, and we did a good look and thought, who's rating these diets? And they were actually physicians, dietitians, researchers, and they really did do a pretty deep analysis. And when they looked at best diet overall, look who number 1, 2, and 3, like the Academy Awards, Mediterranean style diet, DASH, which is dietary approaches to stop hypertension, very similar to Mediterranean diet, and then flexitarian diet. And flexitarian is sort of a cool word that just means, was coined as a way to, hey, some of the time I want to eat vegetarian, but yeah, I still want to be able to have vegetables in my diet. I want to be able to eat more plants, and it's been found to lower rates of chronic disease, balance. It's affordable and really simple recipes. And this book has been around for a while. I still have it on my shelf and use some of the recipes. Really easy swaps. Or maybe you want to have a meatless Monday or a meatless meal. Great ideas that people can use.
We're going to talk about the Mediterranean diet too. Since this was number 1 and the basis for a lot of diseases. Judy, do you want to talk about this one?
Yeah. So the Mediterranean diet has a lot of research behind it as far as quality of life, lowering risk of chronic disease. It's primarily plant-based. You can see that whole first wide, broad foundation is veggies, fruits, grains, olive oil, and beans. And less emphasis on red meat, sugar, and saturated fat. So they actually put fish and shellfish before eggs and dairy. Okay, so they have less of a role. And meats and sweets are not eliminated, but they may be like 10, 15% of your diet. And for those of you who are old enough, there's benefits in red wine and having water more as a beverage with meals than putting emphasis on dairy. And we do love the emphasis also on the bottom foundation that savor your meals with loved ones and be active every day. So one thing I know Angela and I just asked our class last Saturday is how many meals do you eat in front of the screen? Really getting and thinking about the social connection and the joy of pleasure of eating food versus being in front of a screen and not even remembering what you ate. So we like that connection and that movement that the Mediterranean eating style has. Okay. And then as I mentioned, vegan, Angela, that's yours.
Yeah. So vegan or vegetarian, this diet's been around a long time too. And it really, I'm going to talk just about vegan, but it really does have the lowest rate of cardiovascular disease, lowers blood pressure, lowers lipids, lower rates of some cancers. So you're really just not eating anything that has animal basis. And it really only about 1 to 1.5% of the population actually follows this diet. It is also restricting and eliminating a lot of foods that a lot of people do enjoy. But you may be deficient in certain vitamins and iron, omega-3 and choline. So you have to make sure that if you're eating vegetarian or vegan, that you are getting some vitamin supplementation. Vegan in particular is also described as kind of a way of life diet where you're excluding other things like food, furniture, shoes, things with leather, honey is excluded. Vegetarian, you can be lacto or lacto-ovo and include some dairy or some eggs. But these are good plant-based diets that a lot of people, when you're talking about being plant-based, you could be plant-based without being strictly vegan. So
absolutely. And,
yeah.
Angela, your photo, which is beautiful, shows all whole food vegan foods versus
Right.
there are a lot of even ultra processed, right? Even in the vegan world, you can find a lot of really ultra processed foods.
Yeah, so being vegan or vegetarian does not mean necessarily plant-based whole foods. So that's really what we emphasize.
So intuitive eating is really kind of the anti-diet culture approach. And if you're not familiar with it, it's basically a self-care eating framework, that is rooted in science, and it's really informed by clinical practice. And these two dietitians, Evelyn Tribole and Elise Reich, have been developing these 10 principles of intuitive eating since 1993. This is now the 4th edition. And basically, it's aligned with a health at every size, not weight blaming, weight accepting, evidence-based model, which uses a validated assessment scale. And there's been like over 120 studies to show its benefits. So really what it's doing is teaching people how to honor their physical and their mental health. So helping to create a healthy relationship with food, mind, and body. And some people might think, well, hey, if you get permission to eat whatever you want, doesn't that throw away healthy food? And it really doesn't, because one of the principles is honor yourself, honor your self with gentle nutrition and movement. But first, you have to learn how to be in touch with yourself instead of maybe a rigid diet plan telling you what you should be eating and what time you should be eating it at.
Yes, we really like this and support the idea of eating mindfully and following the principles of intuitive eating. And it doesn't eliminate any foods, but it does tell you to appreciate and think about things so that if you have something sweet, you can really savor that first 1 or 2 bites and then feel good like you've really enjoyed it without necessarily eating a whole big piece of something where the taste is actually diminished over time and the pleasure actually diminishes over time.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we have about 10 minutes left. So we're going to go through the rest of the slides.
Yes, that was my hint. Zip through. Okay. So what is a dietary pattern? So basically, having individuals look at the whole picture of what they usually habitually eat and drink, and how do these foods work together to have an impact on their health. And a pattern may predict better health status, and it would consist of nutrient-dense forms of foods across all of the food groups. Okay, let's go to the next slide. So a pattern, so based on this USDA dietary pattern, what they came up with is how do we help people know what to eat? Kind of came down to a healthy Mediterranean style dietary pattern and the healthy vegetarian dietary pattern, which we've seen has a lot of data to support it. So helping you think about that each choice that you make, how do I choose a more nutrient dense? And if most of the time you're picking the cereal that's whole grain rather than the one with added sugar, making those individual choices, those small changes can help people adopt a healthy dietary pattern over the day and over the week. Next slide. Okay, so here's our beautiful USDA healthy plate. And I'm glad to say it's no longer the pyramid and some of the crazy things we've seen in the past. To me, this looks like an attractive quinoa bowl that I would enjoy for lunch. And it's very plant-based with an egg as the one animal protein. But you can see how basically half the plate or the bowl is plant food, right? And the rest supporting, and actually this is more than half, fruits, vegetables, whole grains, something that's pretty easy to gather that can meet all of our nutrient needs. Next slide. Angela, next slide. Okay.
Yeah.
And
go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, you go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, I was just going to mention that there are components that we're concerned for underconsumption, like when we're not eating fruits and vegetables, we're going to be low, as we mentioned, in fiber and potassium and potentially calcium. Vitamin D, difficult to get from food. Most of us need to get supplementation in the winter if you're living up in the Northwest. But overall, if one follows a more healthier dietary pattern, over time, you're going to meet the requirements of what we need on fiber and a lot of these micronutrients that we tend to be chronically low in. So, what's practical advice we can give to you, you can give to your patients? If 85% of the time you're eating nutrient dense choices, that means that 15% of the time, maybe, 3 out of your meals out of the 21 per week, you're having more sweets, you're having something that's fried, you're having those treat foods or that birthday cake, you're still going to get everything you need. And that's, I think, the beauty of a dietary pattern. It's not an all or nothing. What do you think about this concept, Angela?
Yeah, no, I think this is great. I mean, I think it's not setting up rules, but it's saying, you want to eat plant-based whole foods most of the time, and occasionally you might eat something that's not categorized as that, and you're enjoying that. You're out socially with friends and an evening out. I think this is really to meet the guidelines and probably maintain weight. I think if somebody does need to lose weight, or that's a goal for them, I do think they should seek out the advice of a dietitian.
And we also were not addressing activity, which is really the balance that people need. And just really briefly, we've been discussing that probably every day I see a patient who shares, I don't ask, but they share that during COVID, they've gained over 20 pounds from ordering out more sedentary lifestyle. So we're not asking people to necessarily restrict, like, what did you used to do? Oh, we didn't order out as much, or, we were more active. We didn't go to the grocery store, so what are some of those things that bring them back to their healthier patterns? And I did want to mention, Angela, that today is March 1st. It's the first day of National Nutrition Month. So I feel that the fact that we're spreading this message of how to eat food and enjoy food healthfully is kind of exciting for both of us to share with you. And then we're excited to hear about how do we do this sustainably, that we protect our planet while we're trying to eat well.
And the exercise and movement aspect really is good for so many other parts of our health. It's not necessarily for weight loss. We know that people who have to lose weight do have to make dietary changes, but exercise has been shown to be great for helping people maintain their weight.
Absolutely. Okay. And these next few slides will just show briefly, and they show you where the top sources of added sugars, and that would be in our sugar sweetened beverages. So when we trade in water more frequently, maybe save them, more as treats, you'll cut down on a lot of added sugar. Let's take a look at where we get our saturated fat from. Oh my gosh, sandwiches. People don't realize that deli meats and mayonnaises and cheese a lot that they do add. So switching to bowls and leftovers and other things is a really easy way to cut down on some of that saturated fat.
Absolutely.
And yes. And then that brings us back to the guidelines, looking at healthy dietary patterns, customizing those nutrient-dense foods for your personal preferences, tradition, your budget, focusing on how you can work those in, and then trying to have kind of that 85-15 balance. And now the sustainability. Sorry about that. I jumped ahead a little.
So, this was an interesting thing I came across because I happened to have heard Walter Willett lecture on this, and I just found it fascinating. I've been to the website, so I have the website up at the top for you, eatforum.org. And this was a commission that was pulled together to really look at the food, the planet, and the health. So how do we feed 10 billion people and still stay within our planetary boundaries and try and really save the planet and really take into the effect that food has on the planet, and the way we cook and the way we eat is affecting our climate. And so that you can pull this up and you can read the conclusion or you can read the actual paper. But the idea is kind of going along, echoing some of these same things, that if we all eat more plant-based and fewer animal sources, it's going to be healthy and sustainable for the planet. And it's not all or none. So it doesn't say you have to be vegetarian or vegan, but just make small changes in your pattern to incorporate more vegetables and fruits and plant-based products rather than animal-based. And because of the major impact the animals have on the planet. So this was two professors, Walter Willett and Johan Rockstrom, and a bunch of co-authors from a bunch of different countries in a bunch of different fields that really, pulled together this article that came out in the Lancet in 2019. So it's just really fascinating if you're interested in the environmental impact of food and sustainability. So the targets really are looking at the importance of food across the globe. We have to feed all these people, and how do we do it? So their healthy target diet really looks at increasing plants and reducing animal sources, especially, red meat, because that has the highest environmental impact based on greenhouse gas emissions, and limiting refined grains, added sugar, and highly processed food, of course, for our own health, because those contribute so much to mortality and chronic disease. And then they focus on food production and recognize that 38% of the land in the world is dedicated to agriculture, and 2/3 of it is based on, animals and agriculture, and then 1/3 is really for plants and growth of crops. So, we don't want to really keep cutting down forests to get more and more land for agriculture. We want to just use the agricultural land we have more effectively, so we don't have, we have better land use, better water use, and we stop the biodiversity loss that we're currently experiencing. So the idea is you have to do some modeling and work globally to help this to come about, and we need to work together. So this is their example of a healthy diet plate, and they get into much more detail if you read the summary or the paper, but half the plate is fruits and vegetables, so that's a good guideline. And then you've got your whole grains, and then you've got some protein. So you've got all that here, and they show you here that, legumes and nuts and the plant source proteins are really going to be much more dominant than animal source proteins. But animal source proteins are there and not eliminated, because we know a lot of people are not going to want to eat a vegetarian diet. And so these are all beautiful examples of different diets and different cultures from different groups of how you can meet these guidelines. And they all look full and bountiful and delicious. And you'd be excited to sit down to any one of these plates. So we want to conclude by saying, what if we looked at more diet patterns rather than a diet that is used to guide our food choices? We want to keep in mind that some of these most popular diets have food rules and restrictions that really may not be the best for our health, and they may also not be sustainable. So we want to emphasize plants. We want to be plant forward. We want to eat whole foods, and we want to emphasize health over restrictions. And the diets that have been shown to be the best are the Mediterranean style, the flexitarian, which is mainly a plant-based whole foods, and the USDA healthy plate. So those are the three patterns of eating that are the most sustainable and the healthiest for all of us. So that is the conclusion of the slides, and I'll stop sharing now, and we can answer any questions that have come up. All right, well, gosh, there's not a lot of questions. We thought there might be some questions. We find this very controversial just because I think, as I've learned more in my journey in lifestyle medicine over the past 4 years, I have trended more and more plant-based myself. And now I rarely eat, I really probably don't eat any red meat anymore, but I still enjoy fish, and I still eat more of the Mediterranean style diet. But I think it's small steps and transitions for each of us to think about how we're eating, and then how we can best educate our patients. So when patients say, hey, I'm eating this, a balanced diet, I always ask, well, what does that mean to you? How much are you eating? Are you eating all the colors of the rainbow in the produce section for every meal? What are you eating? And then kind of gradually nudge people toward adding more plants. We always focus on adding more, right, Judy, rather than.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I know one of the questions I ask on my intake form is, how do you rate your diet? Just let me know. And people are pretty harsh. They come down pretty hard. And as we open up a dialogue, they'll talk about the barriers, time, convenience, resources. And I think that's a big barrier for a lot of folks, is knowing what to do. We have a question here about what is your general advice for persons with iron deficiency anemia who feel a vegan diet isn't for them? Okay, so they choose not to be a vegan. And also, what is our advice? Well, first of all, I would say work with your healthcare provider, because there can be a lot of reasons why you have anemia. It could be excess bleeding, it can be a disease. So it's good to know the source and to know what you're missing from your diet, because there are both animal and plant sources of iron. Sometimes an iron supplement is needed. So I think I would work with your healthcare provider, don't you think, Angela, on an individual basis with that question to see why are you anemic? Because even in a plant-based diet, sometimes we do have to supplement, maybe short-term with some iron.
Definitely. I mean, I definitely measure ferritin levels, and if somebody's low, recommend they take iron supplementation and then recheck it to see if they're absorbing it well, if they're just not getting enough in their diet. So I think some people don't get enough iron. And how would you tell somebody to absorb more iron? Is there a way they could get more in their iron?
Sure, there's a lot of things. One is if you're having a food that has vitamin C, like strawberries. So I tell people, if you're having a dish with green leafy vegetables, maybe spinach or kale, in order to enhance the absorption, tomatoes, strawberries, red peppers help. And even cooking in an cast iron skillet, you will absorb more iron, right? Right. So there is a lot you can do with food, but sometimes therapeutically, you may need to bring that up with a supplement or address the reason. Yeah. And I'm curious with the audience, if you have any comments about, maybe feeling pressure from people to eat a certain way. I hear patients tell me they're pressured. Well, my husband's on keto, so he wants me to eat keto, and it's hard to, eat the things that I want to eat. Sometimes there can be some, pressure on from family or friends on how to eat. And I think it's important to be authentic to what you want.
It can definitely be hard for people in the same household who all have to eat differently, right? So we want people to, think about that. And it's great if everybody's on the same page, but if everybody's having to cook different meals, that can be tough.
Hey, Angela, what do you think of this question? You want to take the next one?
Yeah.
See if I can help you.
So the question is, can you speak to the change in farming practices in America and how this has impacted the nutrient density of commercially available products? So, obviously not something I'm an expert in, but I think the monoculture farming has not been helpful, right? So when you're really doing, what's really supporting, makes the most money is you do, a big field of corn or a big field of soy that's subsidized by the U.S. government. That's not regenerative farming. So something where you're rotating crops, where you're, allowing the soil to heal and I don't know enough about farming itself, but that is just a much more regenerative, healthy way for the planet to exist, is if you can rotate crops. So I think there's a movement and there's education going on, but I think part of this has to do with the economics and the political, side of things, that really what governments are supporting may not be the best for the planet and health. And so, we really need to educate people to try to, potentially have them redirect and reward people who are doing sustainable farming practices.
Yeah, that's a good one. I know where I'm at University of Washington, we actually have an undergraduate degree in food systems, which is amazing. So they always have, and you can search for it. Every week they have a different seminar on these very similar topics about farm to table, farming, how do we help increase getting more agricultural products that are healthy to inner city populations, and looking at social determinants of health on quality of food. So it really does get down to these systems where we have to protect the planet feed ourselves better, and then have a good understanding of what can we do. Schools are working on these issues, but a lot of times I think people get to adults and it gets to time. It gets to how much energy they want to put into meal preparation. So I think you can be a competent eater, but you have to have the skills and the resources and some education to get there. It's okay to take some shortcuts. It's okay to eat some of these minimal processed foods, but really reflect, how are you feeling with the way you're eating, and what would it take to make some of these small changes? That was
Right.
great.
Yeah, this has been great. Hopefully you all have enjoyed it, and we enjoyed putting it together for all of you. So yeah, I think if there aren't any other questions, we can wrap it up.
Thank you so much for sharing the first day of Nutrition Month. It's actually a rare sunny day in the Pacific
right.
Northwest after we've been monsooned with rain. So it's fun to be able to take an hour out of our day and share with you. And if there's questions you wanted to ask, maybe you didn't feel comfortable asking at the webinar, please share them with ASRM. Sarah said there's an email, right?
Yeah.
That you are able to. And thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's been great. Have a great evening or afternoon.
Wherever you are.
Yeah.
Thank you, Angela and Judy, for a fantastic discussion. And thank you to our attendees for joining this engaging session as well. And like Judy, you mentioned, it's the first day of Nutrition Month, so
Yes.
a great way and a great start to celebrate. This session was recorded and will be available on our website in the near future. Please watch your email for notification about future webinars, and for any further questions or comments, please don't hesitate to contact us at webinars@asrm.org. This concludes the webinar.